Ainsley Renwick sat alone at the corner table in the cafeteria, her sandwich untouched on the tray before her. 3 tables away, Tatum Voss held court with her usual crowd, their laughter cutting through the noise of 200 middle schoolers eating lunch. Ainsley knew without looking that some of those laughs were aimed at her. They had been for the past 2 weeks, ever since she had made the mistake of telling the truth. It had started so innocuously. Mrs. Holloway had asked the class to share what their parents did for work. Simple enough. Ainsley had raised her hand and said her mother was a Navy SEAL. The silence that followed had been immediate and absolute. Then Tatum had laughed, that sharp bark of disbelief that signaled to everyone else that mockery was acceptable, even encouraged. "Your mom?" Tatum had said, her voice dripping with scorn. "A Navy SEAL? Sure she is." Mrs. Holloway had smiled, that tight smile teachers use when they think a student is acting out for attention. "That's very creative, Ainsley," she had said. "But let's stick to real careers, shall we?" The thing was, Ainsley had been sticking to real careers. Her mother, Commander Sloane Renwick, was indeed a Navy SEAL, one of the very few women to make it through the brutal selection process and into the special operations community. But Sloane's work required something called operational security, a term Ainsley had learned early in life. It meant her mother's real job had to stay hidden, buried beneath the cover story of being a government contractor with vague technology consulting work. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe military families are common in your area, or perhaps you've witnessed kids being bullied for telling an unbelievable truth. Ainsley pushed a grape around her tray with her fork. Across the cafeteria, Crew Dalton caught her eye and gave a small wave. He was the only one who had believed her, or at least the only one willing to say so out loud. That loyalty had cost him. He now ate lunch at a table with the chess club kids, exiled from his former friends for defending the weird girl with the Navy SEAL fantasy. The mockery had evolved in the 2 weeks since that fateful class discussion. At first it had been simple, whispered jokes, eye rolls, the occasional snicker when Ainsley walked past. Then Tatum had gotten creative. She had started a social media account called Real Navy Mom, posting pictures of suburban women doing ordinary things with captions like breaking news. Local mom conquers grocery store aisle. Elite training pays off. The account had 73 followers now, most of them from school. Ainsley had made the mistake of showing her mother. Sloane had looked at the phone screen for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she had handed it back and said something that Ainsley still didn't fully understand. "The opinion of people who don't know you doesn't change who you are, sweetheart. Let them think what they want." But it wasn't that easy. It wasn't easy when Tatum and her friends whispered just loud enough for Ainsley to hear as she walked to her locker. It wasn't easy when someone had edited her yearbook photo to show her in a fake military helmet with the caption "Stolen Valor Barbie." It wasn't easy when even the teachers looked at her with pity, as if she were troubled or starved for attention. The worst part was that Ainsley couldn't even prove them wrong. Her mother kept everything about her real work locked away, hidden, classified. There were no uniforms hanging in the closet at home, no medals on display, no photographs from deployments. Their house in the quiet suburban neighborhood looked exactly like every other house on the street. Neat lawn, 2-car garage, basketball hoop over the driveway. Sloane drove a sensible sedan and wore yoga pants to the grocery store and waved to neighbors who thought she worked some boring office job. Ainsley had once found a scar on her mother's shoulder, a puckered line of tissue that looked like it had been stitched by someone in a hurry. She had asked about it. Sloane had smiled and said she had fallen on a work trip. The smile hadn't reached her eyes, and Ainsley had learned not to ask follow-up questions. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Ainsley threw away her uneaten food and headed to 5th period history. As she walked through the crowded hallway, someone bumped into her hard enough to send her books scattering across the floor. She looked up to see Tatum's friend, a tall 8th grader named Barricade, smirking down at her. "Whoops," he said flatly. "Didn't see you there. Guess I need some of that Navy SEAL training your mom has." Laughter rippled through the students nearby. Ainsley knelt and gathered her books, her face burning. When she stood, Crew was there, having picked up her history textbook. He handed it to her without a word, his jaw tight. They walked to class together in silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Mrs. Holloway was already at her desk when they entered. She glanced up at Ainsley with that same pitying expression she had worn for 2 weeks now, the look that said she thought Ainsley was a troubled child in need of intervention. Ainsley slid into her seat near the back and opened her textbook, trying to focus on the chapter about World War II and the various military operations that had changed the course of history. The irony wasn't lost on her. The next morning brought a new level of torment. Ainsley discovered the moment she opened her locker. Someone had taped a printed image to the inside of the door. A stock photo of a muscular man in military gear with her mother's face crudely photoshopped onto it. Beneath it, written in thick marker, were the words "World's Fakest Hero." She tore it down quickly, crumpling it into her backpack, but not before several students walking past had seen it and started laughing. Tatum stood near the water fountain with her arms crossed, watching with satisfaction as Ainsley's humiliation played out exactly as planned. Throughout the day, Ainsley noticed more signs of the escalating campaign. Someone had created a fake assignment and left it on her desk in English class, titled "My Mom, the Imaginary Soldier," a creative writing exercise. During gym, when teams were being chosen for basketball, Tatum had announced loudly that she didn't want Ainsley on her team because she probably thinks she has special ops athletic abilities or something. Even worse was the silence from the adults. Mr. Paxton, the gym teacher, had heard Tatum's comment and said nothing. Mrs. Chun, who supervised the hallway during passing period, had walked right past as Barrett and his friend surrounded Ainsley near the stairwell, asking in mock serious tones if her mom could teach them how to survive in the wilderness using only a paperclip and some shoelaces. Crew tried to intervene during lunch, stepping between Ainsley and a group of 7th graders who had started chanting "fake, fake, fake" under their breaths. One of them, a kid named Jensen Thorne who had been Crew's friend since elementary school, shoved Crew backward into a lunch table. "Stay out of it, Dalton," Jensen said, "unless you want everyone to think you're as crazy as she is." Crew had looked at Ainsley then, his expression torn between loyalty and self-preservation. She had given him the smallest shake of her head. "Don't," she had mouthed. "It's not worth it." He had backed down, his shoulders slumped, and for the rest of lunch he sat 3 tables away, close enough to watch, but far enough to avoid becoming a target himself. That evening, Ainsley came home to find her mother in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the kind of precise, efficient movements that spoke to training most people would never recognize. Sloane looked up when Ainsley dropped her backpack on the floor with more force than necessary. "Rough day?" Sloane asked, her voice calm. Ainsley wanted to scream. She wanted to demand that her mother march into school tomorrow in full uniform and shut everyone up. Instead, she said, they made another fake social media account. "This one's called Navy SEAL Mom Life Tips. They're posting jokes about you." Sloane set down the knife and wiped her hands on a towel. She moved around the counter and sat on one of the kitchen stools, gesturing for Ainsley to join her. When Ainsley remained standing, arms crossed defensively, Sloane sighed. "I know this is hard, sweetheart. I know you want to fix it." "You could fix it," Ainsley said. "You could just tell them the truth. Show them something. Anything." Sloane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was a tell Ainsley had learned to recognize, the tiny crack in her mother's carefully maintained composure. "Some truths are dangerous to share," Sloane said quietly. "Not because they're lies, but because they protect people. My work, what I really do, it requires that most people don't know about it. If the wrong people found out, it could put others at risk. It could put you at risk." "But these are just kids at school," Ainsley protested. "They're not terrorists or whatever." Sloane reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Ainsley's ear, a gesture so gentle it made Ainsley's throat tighten. "Information travels," she said. "What seems harmless in a middle school cafeteria can end up in places you'd never imagine. I need you to trust me on this. Can you do that?" Ainsley wanted to say yes. She wanted to be the brave daughter of a brave mother, someone who could endure mockery and isolation because it served a greater purpose. But she was 11 years old, and every day at school felt like walking through fire. "I don't know," she whispered. Sloane pulled her into a hug, And for a moment, Ainsley let herself be small again, protected in her mother's arms. When they separated, Sloane held her at arm's length and looked directly into her eyes. "You're stronger than you know," she said. "Stronger than they can imagine. Remember that." The next day at school, things got worse. During morning announcements, Principal Finch's voice crackled over the intercom, reminding students that there was a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. Ainsley felt a flutter of hope, thinking perhaps someone had finally reported what was happening. But then, during second period, a student aide delivered a note asking Ainsley to report to the principal's office at the end of the day. When she arrived, Principal Finch was sitting behind his desk with Mrs. Holloway in one of the visitor chairs. They both wore expressions of concern that made Ainsley's stomach drop. "Ainsley," Principal Finch said, gesturing to the empty chair, "please sit down. We wanted to talk to you about some concerning behavior we've been noticing." Ainsley sat, confused. Concerning behavior? She hadn't done anything. Mrs. Holloway leaned forward, her voice taking on that syrupy tone adults use when they think they're being compassionate. "Sweetheart, we know that sometimes when children are seeking attention, they might exaggerate or make up stories about their families. It's not uncommon, especially when a parent works a lot or travels frequently." The realization hit Ainsley like cold water. They thought she was the problem. They thought she had made everything up and that the bullying was a natural consequence of her supposed lies. "My mom really is a Navy SEAL," Ainsley said, her voice small. Principal Finch exchanged a glance with Mrs. Holloway. "Ainsley," he said gently, "we called the number your mother provided as her work contact. It's a general government office line. They said they have no record of a Sloane Renwick in any military capacity. Now, we're not here to punish you. We want to help, but we need you to understand that making up elaborate stories is causing problems for you socially." Ainsley sat frozen in the chair, staring at Principal Finch as his words echoed in her mind. They had called her mother's work number. Of course they had found nothing. That was the entire point of operational security, the very thing her mother had tried to explain. The cover had to be airtight, had to withstand scrutiny from everyone, including well-meaning school administrators who thought they were helping a troubled child. "I'm not making it up," Ainsley said, but even she could hear how weak her voice sounded. Mrs. Holloway reached over and patted her hand. "We understand that you believe what you're saying, dear. Sometimes our minds create stories to cope with difficult feelings. Maybe you wish your mother had a more exciting job, or maybe you feel like she's not around enough. That's perfectly normal." The condescension in her teacher's voice made something harden inside Ainsley's chest. She pulled her hand away and stood up. "Can I go now?" Principal Finch sighed. "We're going to schedule a meeting with your mother and our school counselor, Mrs. Vega. We think it will be helpful for everyone to talk through what's been happening. In the meantime, Ainsley, please try to focus on making real connections with your classmates. Stop insisting on this story. It's only making things harder for you." Ainsley left the office without another word. The hallway was empty, classes still in session. She walked slowly toward her locker, her mind spinning. How could she prove something that was designed to be unprovable? How could she make people believe a truth that her mother's very life depended on keeping secret? That weekend, Tatum's campaign reached new heights. She had organized what she called a Navy SEAL challenge at the park near school, posting about it on every social media platform with the hashtag #RealHeroesOnly. Dozens of students showed up on Saturday afternoon, including crew who texted Ainsley a warning but came anyway, unable to resist the social pressure. Ainsley knew she shouldn't go. Her mother was away on another mysterious work trip, gone since Thursday, with only a brief text saying she'd be back Monday. But something stubborn inside Ainsley refused to hide. If they wanted to mock her, let them do it to her face. The park was crowded when she arrived. Tatum had set up a makeshift obstacle course using playground equipment, pool noodles, and jump ropes. A cardboard sign, "Red Navy SEAL Training for Fake Heroes." Students sat on picnic tables and park benches, phones out, ready to record. Tatum spotted Ainsley immediately. Well, she called out, "The guest of honor has arrived. Ready to show us some of those elite skills your mom taught you?" Ainsley wanted to turn around and leave, but her feet kept moving forward. She thought about what her mother had said. "You're stronger than you know, stronger than they can imagine." "Sure," Ainsley said quietly. "I'll try your course." The crowd erupted in excitement. Tatum's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She had been hoping for this. "Okay then," she said. "Let's see what you've got, Renwick." The course was deliberately humiliating. It started with Army crawling under a series of low-hanging pool noodles while other students sprayed water bottles at her. Then came a balance beam made from fallen log, followed by climbing up and down the playground structure while carrying a heavy backpack filled with rocks. The final challenge involved doing push-ups in the sand while students counted mockingly, their voices dripping with sarcasm. Ainsley did it all. She crawled through the mud. She balanced on the log without falling. She climbed the structure even as the backpack's straps dug into her shoulders. She did 20 push-ups in the sand while sweat dripped into her eyes and every muscle burned. When she finished, she stood up and faced Tatum, her clothes filthy, her hair matted with dirt and water. The crowd had gone quiet. Whatever response they had expected, Ainsley's grim determination had not been it. Even Tatum looked slightly uncertain. "That's what I thought," Ainsley said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You wanted to see if I'd back down." "I didn't." Tatum recovered quickly, her face twisting into a sneer. "That doesn't prove anything," she said. "Any idiot can do monkey bars and push-ups. Where's your proof, Renwick? Where's the uniform? The medals? The photos? All right, they don't exist because your mom is just a regular boring nobody and you're a liar." Several students laughed, though it sounded forced now. Crew stepped forward from the crowd, his face flushed. "Leave her alone, Tatum. This has gone far enough." Barricade moved to intercept him, shoving Crew backward. He stumbled and fell into the sand. "Stay down, Dalton," Barrett said. "This isn't your fight." Ainsley helped Crew to his feet. "Let's go," she said quietly. They walked away from the park together, the sounds of laughter and mocking following them. Behind them, someone had already posted the video with the caption "Navy SEAL wannabe fails to prove anything." By the time Ainsley got home, it had been shared 47 times. That night, she sat in her room and cried for the first time since this had all started. She cried from exhaustion and humiliation and anger. She cried because she had tried to be strong and it hadn't mattered. She cried because her mother was somewhere far away, doing something dangerous and important, and Ainsley couldn't even tell anyone about it without sounding like a delusional child. When her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, just a brief "I'm okay, love you," Ainsley almost didn't respond. But she did, typing back "love you too," because despite everything, it was true. Monday morning arrived with a new development. Ainsley opened her locker to find it had been broken into. Someone had gone through her things, scattering papers and breaking her spare pencils. But worse than the vandalism was what had been left behind. A collection of toy soldiers and a child's plastic military helmet with a note that read, "Since you love fake military stuff so much." Mrs. Holloway happened to walk past just as Ainsley discovered the mess. The teacher stopped, took in the scene, and her expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like vindication. "Ainsley," she said slowly, "did you do this yourself?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "What? No. Someone broke into my locker." Mrs. Holloway pursed her lips. "I think you need to come with me to Principal Finch's office. Now." Principal Finch sat behind his desk with his hands folded, studying Ainsley with an expression that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. Mrs. Holloway stood near the window, arms crossed, looking disappointed. The broken pencils and toy soldiers from Ainsley's locker sat arranged on the desk between them like evidence at a trial. "Ainsley," Principal Finch began, his voice measured and calm in a way that somehow made everything worse. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you vandalize your own locker and plant these items to get attention?" "No," Ainsley said immediately. "Someone else did it. Probably Tatum and her friends." Principal Finch exchanged a glance with Mrs. Holloway. "The problem, Ainsley, is that this kind of behavior fits a pattern we've been observing. Making up elaborate stories, seeking attention through increasingly dramatic means. The school counselor calls it attention-seeking escalation. It's not uncommon in children who feel neglected or who struggle with their sense of identity. I'm not making anything up, Ainsley said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. I've been telling the truth since the beginning. My mother is a Navy SEAL. Just because you can't verify it doesn't mean it's not real. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward. Sweetheart, we understand that you believe what you're saying, but we have a responsibility to help you. We've scheduled a mandatory counseling session for this afternoon, and we need to have a serious conversation with your mother when she returned from her trip. Ainsley felt trapped, cornered by adults who had already decided she was the problem. She thought about what her mother had taught her about staying calm under pressure, about not revealing information even when interrogated. The irony of using SEAL tactics to survive middle school was not lost on her. Fine, she said quietly. Can I go back to class now? Not yet, Principal Finch said. We need to discuss consequences for the disruption you've caused. The park incident this weekend resulted in complaints from several parents. Creating a hostile environment for other students is a serious matter. Creating a hostile environment? Ainsley couldn't believe what she was hearing. They humiliated me. They made me crawl through mud and filmed it. How's that my fault? You chose to participate, Mrs. Holloway said gently. No one forced you to go to that park. And honestly, Ainsley, your insistence on this narrative about your mother is what's driving the conflict. If you would just acknowledge the truth and move forward, things could get better for you. That afternoon, Ainsley sat in the counselor's office while Mrs. Vega, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, asked questions that felt like tiny knives. How often does your mother travel? Do you feel lonely at home? Do you sometimes wish your family was different? Have you ever made up stories before to make yourself feel special? Ainsley answered in monotone, giving nothing away, revealing nothing. She had learned from watching her mother that silence was sometimes the strongest defense. When Mrs. Vega finally let her go, she left with a handful of pamphlets about healthy coping mechanisms and managing feelings of inadequacy. Sloane returned home that evening looking exhausted. There was a new bruise on her forearm that she tried to hide under her sleeve, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone who had pushed their body to its limits. But when she saw Ainsley sitting at the kitchen table with her homework untouched, she pushed aside her own fatigue. What happened? Sloane asked, sitting down across from her daughter. Everything spilled out. The locker vandalism, the principal's accusations, the mandatory counseling, the constant implication that Ainsley was troubled, attention-seeking, dishonest. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face, and her mother's expression had gone very still. I need you to make them believe me, Ainsley said desperately. I need you to tell them the truth. Show them something. Your ID, your uniform, anything. Please, Mom. I can't do this anymore. Sloane reached across the table and took both of Ainsley's hands in hers. The calluses on her mother's palms were rough against Ainsley's skin. Listen to me very carefully, she said. I know this is hard. I know it feels impossible. But what I do, who I really am, that information is classified at the highest levels. It's not classified to keep you from proving a point at school. It's classified because lives depend on it. Missions depend on it. If the wrong people knew what I did, where I operated, they could use that information to hurt people I work with. People who have families, children, just like you. But these are just kids, Ainsley protested weakly. Information doesn't stay contained, Sloane said firmly. A kid posts something online. Someone else shares it. It spreads. Eventually it reaches someone who shouldn't see it. I've seen operations compromised by less. I've seen good people die because someone talked when they shouldn't have. I will not risk that, not even to make your life easier. Do you understand? Ainsley wanted to understand. She wanted to be noble and selfless and brave. But she was 11 and exhausted and so tired of fighting alone. I understand, she whispered, even though part of her didn't, not really. Sloane pulled her into a fierce hug. You're stronger than you know, she said quietly. Stronger than they can imagine. And someday, when this is over, you'll understand why this strength mattered. Why staying silent when everything in you wanted to scream was the right thing to do. I need you to trust me. Okay, Ainsley said into her mother's shoulder. Okay. The next day, Sloane came to school for the scheduled parent conference. She arrived looking every inch the suburban mother. Neat slacks, a simple blouse, minimal makeup. She sat in Principal Finch's office with perfect posture while he and Mrs. Holloway expressed their concerns about Ainsley's behavior, her fabricated stories, her need for psychological intervention. Sloane listened patiently, her face neutral. When they finished, she spoke in a calm, measured tone. I appreciate your concern for my daughter. I work as a government contractor, which requires frequent travel. Perhaps Ainsley has misunderstood the nature of my work and embellished it in her own mind. Children sometimes do that. I'll talk to her about being more honest with her peers and teachers. Ainsley, sitting beside her mother, felt something crack inside her chest. She knew her mother was playing a role, maintaining the cover, protecting them both. But knowing the reason didn't make the betrayal feel any less sharp. Her own mother was sitting there, letting these people think Ainsley was a liar, and there was nothing either of them could do about it. Principal Finch nodded, satisfied. I think that's a healthy perspective, Ms. Renwick. We just want what's best for Ainsley. With some counseling and a commitment to honesty, I'm sure she'll be fine. As they walked to the car afterward, Sloane's hand rested briefly on Ainsley's shoulder. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know that hurt. Ainsley didn't respond. She got in the car and stared out the window as they drove home, feeling more alone than ever before. The days following the parent conference were the worst yet. Word had spread that even Ainsley's own mother had essentially admitted the Navy SEAL story was a fabrication, a misunderstanding born from a child's overactive imagination. Teachers now looked at Ainsley with open pity. Students who had previously been neutral now felt emboldened to join in the mockery. After all, if even her own mother wouldn't back up her claims, what did that say? Tatum was triumphant. During lunch on Tuesday, she stood on one of the cafeteria benches and announced to anyone who would listen that Ainsley's mom had finally admitted the truth to the principal. She's just a boring office worker, Tatum declared, and Ainsley is just a pathetic liar who got caught. The cafeteria erupted in laughter and applause. Crew found Ainsley afterward in the library, where she had retreated to hide. He sat down across from her without asking permission, his expression troubled. I still believe you, he said quietly. I don't care what anyone says. I know you're not a liar. Ainsley looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. Thanks, she said. But it doesn't matter anymore, does it? No one's ever going to believe me. I believe you, Crew repeated. That has to count for something. It did count for something, though Ainsley couldn't quite articulate what. Having one person on her side made the isolation bearable, even if barely. They spent the rest of lunch in the library, not talking much, just existing in a space where mockery couldn't reach them. That Friday, the school announced a field trip for the following week. All 7th and 8th graders would visit the National History Museum downtown, a sprawling complex that housed exhibits on everything from ancient civilizations to modern military conflicts. Permission slips were distributed, and students buzzed with excitement at the prospect of missing a full day of classes. Ainsley took her permission slip home and left it on the kitchen counter. Sloane found it that evening while making dinner. She picked it up, scanned it, then looked at Ainsley. You gonna go? Ainsley shrugged. I don't know. Spending an entire day trapped on a bus with everyone sounds pretty terrible. Sloane set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables and came around the counter. She sat on the stool next to Ainsley, close enough that their shoulders touched. I know you're angry with me, she said. For the conference. For not telling them the truth. Ainsley stared at the granite countertop. I'm not angry. I understand why you did it. She paused, searching for words. I just wish understanding made it hurt less. Sloane nodded slowly. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. She was quiet for a moment, then added, you should go on the field trip. Don't let them take everything from you. You love museums. That was true. Ainsley had always loved museums, the way they preserved history and made the past feel immediate and real. Before all of this had started, she had looked forward to this trip. The thought of missing it because of Tatum and her cruelty made something stubborn flare inside her chest. Okay, she said. I'll go. The following Tuesday morning, Ainsley boarded the school bus with crew beside her. They chose seats near the back, away from the clusters of popular students who had claimed the middle rows. Tatum sat with her friends 3 rows ahead, occasionally turning around to smirk at Ainsley before whispering something that made her companions laugh. Mrs. Holloway and Mr. Paxton served as chaperones, sitting near the front of the bus and largely ignoring the social dynamics playing out behind them. The ride took 40 minutes through city traffic, and by the time they arrived at the museum, Ainsley had endured countless pointed looks and whispered comments. The museum was enormous, its marble facade imposing against the gray November sky. Inside, the ceiling soared 3 stories high, and the main atrium featured a massive sculpture of intertwined figures representing unity and strength. The students were divided into smaller groups, each assigned to different wings of the museum before they would reconvene for lunch in the cafeteria. Ainsley and crew ended up in a group heading to the modern military exhibit, along with Tatum, Barrett, and several other students who had made Ainsley's life miserable. Mrs. Holloway led them through galleries showcasing uniforms from different branches of service, displays of medals and commendations, interactive exhibits about military technology and strategy. When they reached the section on Special Operations Forces, Tatum made a point of standing close to Ainsley. "Hey, Renwick," she said loudly. "Maybe you'll see your mom's picture on the wall." "Oh, wait, she's not actually a SEAL." "My bad." Several students snickered. Mrs. Holloway either didn't hear or chose to ignore the comment. Ainsley focused on reading the placard in front of her, which described the selection process for Navy SEAL training. The words swam before her eyes as she fought to maintain composure. The exhibit included a video presentation about SEAL operations, featuring interviews with active duty personnel whose faces were digitally obscured for security reasons. The students gathered around the screen, some genuinely interested, others making jokes. Ainsley watched as a shadowed figure described the physical and mental demands of the job, the commitment required, the sacrifices made. Barrett nudged Tatum and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I bet Ainsley's mom watched this video, and that's where she got the idea to lie about it." Classic stolen valor. Crew spun around. "Shut up, Barrett. Seriously, just shut up." Barrett stood up straighter, his height advantage obvious. "Or what, Dalton? You going to defend your little girlfriend? Both of you are delusional." Mrs. Holloway finally intervened, stepping between them. "That's enough, all of you. This is a museum, not a playground." "Barrett, crew, separate now." "Ainsley, maybe you should move to a different part of the exhibit." So Ainsley was being punished again for simply existing. She moved away from the group, finding herself in a quieter corner near a display of historical photographs for various conflicts. Crew followed despite Mrs. Holloway's instruction, positioning himself as a buffer between Ainsley and the rest of the group. They spent the next hour moving through exhibits, each one bringing fresh commentary from Tatum and her friends. When they passed a display about military families and the sacrifices of service members' children, Tatum made a show of reading the placard out loud and adding, "Too bad some people have to make up stories about sacrifice instead of actually living it." By the time the groups reconvened for lunch in the museum cafeteria, Ainsley felt hollowed out, exhausted from holding herself together. She found a table in the far corner with crew, and they ate their packed lunches in relative peace while the rest of the students congregated in noisy clusters across the large room. Principal Finch had joined the trip as an additional chaperone, and Ainsley noticed him watching her from where he stood near the cafeteria entrance. His expression was that same mixture of concern and pity that had become so familiar. He probably thought she was having a breakdown, that being surrounded by military history was triggering her delusions, or whatever psychological term they had decided fit her situation. What Ainsley didn't know, what none of them knew, was that at that exact moment, 3 men were entering the museum through a service entrance on the lower level. They wore maintenance uniforms and carried tool bags, and the security guard who glanced at their forged credentials waved them through without a second thought. By the time the students finished lunch and began moving toward the afternoon exhibits, Those three men had positioned themselves at key points throughout the building and were making final preparations for something that would change everything. The afternoon session took the students to the upper floors of the museum, where rotating exhibits showcased various aspects of American history. Ainsley's group was assigned to explore the Democracy and Governance Wing, a collection of displays about constitutional history, civic responsibility, and the evolution of democratic institutions. It should have been boring enough to keep everyone quiet, but Tatum found ways to make even constitutional amendments into ammunition. As they passed a display about freedom of speech, she made a pointed comment about how some people abused that freedom by spreading lies. When they reached an exhibit about the importance of truth in democratic society, Barrett laughed so hard he had to lean against the wall. Mrs. Holloway shot the morning looks but said nothing substantive, as if she had grown too weary of the constant needling to address it anymore. Crew stayed close to Ainsley, his presence a small shield against the worst of it. They fell behind the main group slightly, lingering at exhibits that genuinely interested them and creating distance from the mockery. Ainsley found herself reading about civic courage, about ordinary people who had stood up for truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. The irony was almost painful. The museum's public address system crackled to life, with a pleasant female voice reminding visitors that the facility would be closing in 2 hours and directing them to available exhibits and amenities. The announcement echoed through the marble corridors, bouncing off high ceilings and glass display cases. Normal. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. Ainsley noticed at first because her mother had trained her, intentionally or not, to notice things. Small details that didn't fit, like the man in the maintenance uniform who wasn't actually maintaining anything, who stood near the emergency exit watching the flow of visitors with too much focus. Or the way another man, also in uniform, kept touching his ear as if adjusting an earpiece while speaking under his breath. Or how the third man had positioned himself near the main stairwell with a tool bag he never opened. She touched Crew's arm. "Something's wrong," she whispered. He looked at her with concern. "What do you mean?" "Those men," Ainsley said quietly, nodding subtly toward the nearest one. "They're not really maintenance workers. Look at their shoes. Look at how they're standing." Crew followed her gaze. "They look fine to me." "Ainsley, are you okay?" Before she could respond, everything changed. The pleasant museum atmosphere shattered in an instant when one of the men pulled a weapon from his tool bag. The crack of a single gunshot into the ceiling brought immediate screaming and chaos. Visitors scattered in every direction while the three men moved with coordinated precision, herding people toward the large central exhibition hall. "Get down, get down, get down," one of them shouted, his voice hard and commanding. "Everyone into the main hall. Now, anyone who runs gets hurt." Students screamed. Mrs. Holloway tried to maintain order, but her voice was drowned out by panic. Mr. Paxton moved toward one of the men and was immediately struck across the face with the butt of a weapon, dropping to the floor with blood streaming from his nose. That silenced any thoughts of resistance. Ainsley felt time slowed down the way her mother had once described combat situations. Everything became hyper-aware. She noted the men's positioning, their weapons, their communication patterns. She noticed that they were corralling people, but not immediately harming anyone beyond Mr. Paxton's lesson. This was about control, about creating a hostage situation. That meant demands would follow. That meant negotiation. That meant time. "Move!" Someone shoved her from behind. She stumbled forward with the crowd, Crew grabbing her arm to steady her. They were pushed into the massive central exhibition hall, a space designed to hold hundreds of visitors. Now, it would hold hostages. Students clung to each other, crying. Adults tried to shield children. Principal Finch was attempting to speak to one of the armed men, his voice shaking as he tried to reason with someone who had no interest in reason. "Everyone sit down," the man shouted. "Phone's on the floor in front of you. Anyone who tries to call or text, I see that screen light up and people start getting hurt. We clear?" Phones clattered to the marble floor, dozens of them. Ainsley sat down with Crew beside her, but her mind was racing through everything her mother had taught her without meaning to. Find exits. Note obstacles. Stay calm. Keep others calm. Don't be a hero, but be ready if opportunity comes. Tatum was sobbing 3 feet away, her earlier bravado completely gone. Barrett looked pale and terrified. Mrs. Holloway had her arms around 2 crying 6th graders. Principal Finch had both hands raised in a placating gesture that made him look weak and frightened. No one looked like they knew what to do. No one except Ainsley, who had grown up in a house where tactical thinking was as natural as breathing. She caught Crew's eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. Stay quiet. Stay still. Don't draw attention. He understood immediately, his fear giving way to trust in her judgment. They sat together near the edge of the group, not in the center where panic was most concentrated, but not so far out that they would be noticed by their captors. One of the men was speaking into a radio, coordinating with someone outside. Museum is secure. We have approximately 200 hostages, mostly civilians, large group of students. So it will take time to deploy. We own the advantage here. Ainsley's heart was pounding, but her breathing stayed controlled. She had been scared before, during her mother's long deployments when she didn't know if Sloan was alive or dead. She had been scared during the weeks of bullying and isolation. But this was different. This was immediate physical danger, and somehow that made it easier to focus. There were actions to take, decisions to make, ways to survive. She scanned the hall methodically. 3 exits visible from where she sat. Heavy marble pillars that could provide cover. Display cases that could be toppled as obstacles or distractions. Windows on the upper level, though too high to reach without climbing. She cataloged it all while appearing to be just another terrified child frozen in fear. Near the center of the hostage group, a younger student started hyperventilating, his panic attracting the attention of one of the armed men. The man approached, weapon raised. "Shut that kid up," he growled at the teacher nearest him. Mrs. Holloway tried to calm the boy, but his hyperventilation was getting worse. The armed man's patience was visibly thinning. "I said shut him up." Without thinking, Ainsley stood up. She moved toward the panicking child, her movements slow and non-threatening. The armed man swung his weapon toward her. "Sit down," he barked. "He's having a panic attack," Ainsley said, her voice steady. "If you let me help him, he'll quiet down. If he doesn't, he might pass out or get worse. Your choice." The man studied her for a moment, surprised by her composure. "Fine. 2 minutes. Then you sit back down." Ainsley knelt beside the boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old. She took his hand and made him look at her. "Breathe with me," she said quietly. "In through your nose, count to 4. Hold it, count to 4. Out through your mouth, count to 4. She demonstrated, keeping her own breathing slow and deliberate. The boy tried to follow, his chest heaving. "Again," she said. "You're doing good. Just keep breathing with me." It took several cycles, but gradually the boy's breathing slowed. His panic receded enough that he stopped making noise. Ainsley squeezed his hand once, and then returned to her spot next to Crew. The armed man watched her go, something like curiosity in his expression, before returning to his position. Crew leaned close and whispered, "How did you know how to do that?" "My mom taught me," Ainsley whispered back. "For my own panic attacks where she deploys." It wasn't entirely true. Sloan had taught her those breathing techniques, yes, but also as part of basic stress management for high-pressure situations. The kind of high-pressure situations a Navy SEAL might face. The kind Ainsley was facing right now. The first hour passed with agonizing slowness. The armed men had established a perimeter around the exhibition hall, blocking all exits while maintaining communication with whoever was coordinating their operation from outside. Through the tall windows, Ainsley could see police vehicles arriving, their lights flashing silently in the growing afternoon shadows. A helicopter circled overhead. The siege had begun. Principal Finch had been chosen, or had volunteered, to act as intermediary between the hostages and their captors. He stood near the center of the hall, his shirt stained with sweat, his voice cracking as he relayed demands. "They want safe passage out of the city," he told the frightened crowd. "They want a bus and guaranteed exit. They say if police try to breach, they'll start shooting hostages." A fresh wave of crying spread through the students. Tatum was curled into a ball, her face buried in her knees. Barrett sat with his back against the display case, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible terror. Mrs. Holloway kept whispering prayers under her breath. Even Mr. Paxton, who had recovered from his earlier blow, looked defeated and helpless. Ainsley remained alert, watching, learning. She noticed that one of the three men seemed less confident than the others, his weapon handling slightly awkward, his positioning often leaving gaps in their coverage. That was useful information. She noticed that they checked their phones frequently, which meant they were waiting for something, coordinating with outside support. That suggested this operation had layers beyond what was visible here. Crew had gone quiet beside her, his fear giving way to a kind of numb shock. Ainsley touched his arm gently. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Help is coming." "How do you know?" He whispered back. "Because this is what happens in hostage situations," she said. "There are protocols, negotiators, response teams. They'll wear them down or find an opening. We just have to stay calm and wait." Crew looked at her with something between confusion and awe. "You sound like you've studied this stuff." Ainsley almost smiled. "My mom made me watch a lot of documentaries," she said. It was true, though she left out that those documentaries had been instructional rather than entertainment, that Sloan had used them to teach tactical thinking without ever explicitly saying that was what she was doing. Another hour crawled by. The armed men grew more agitated as negotiations outside apparently stalled. One of them, the leader based on how the others deferred to him, began pacing. He spoke into his radio with increasing frustration. "They're stalling," he said. "Playing for time. Tell them we're serious. Tell them we'll prove it." Principal Finch's face went pale. "Please," he said. "There are children here. Whatever you want, we can work it out. Just don't hurt anyone." The leader ignored him. He pointed to Mr. Paxton. "You, stand up. Come here." Mr. Paxton rose on shaking legs. The man grabbed him by the shoulder and forced him to his knees in the center of the room where everyone could see. He put his weapon to the teacher's head. "This is the message," he said into his radio. "You have 10 minutes to show progress on our demands, or I pull this trigger." Students screamed. Several teachers begged. Principal Finch tried to intervene and was shoved back hard enough to fall. Mr. Paxton closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayer. The museum had gone from hostage situation to execution theater in seconds. Ainsley felt her heart racing, but forced herself to think clearly. This was an escalation tactic meant to pressure negotiators. But it was also dangerous because it could spiral. If they actually killed Mr. Paxton, they would cross a line that would change law enforcement's entire approach. Deadly force would be authorized. Negotiations would end. They would breach. She studied the leader's body language. His finger wasn't on the trigger. His stance suggested theater rather than genuine intent. He was bluffing, pushing boundaries to force compliance. Probably, but probably wasn't certain, and Mr. Paxton's life hung on that distinction. The 10 minutes felt like hours. Students sobbed. Adults pleaded. Mr. Paxton remained kneeling with a gun to his head, his face a mask of terror. Ainsley noticed that the less confident gunman, the one with awkward weapon handling, was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. His moral threshold was lower than the others. Another useful detail. Finally, the radio crackled. The leader listened, then lowered his weapon. Mr. Paxton collapsed forward, gasping. The leader pulled him up roughly and shoved him back toward the hostages. "Progress is being made," he announced. "As long as cooperation continues, no one gets hurt. But test us again, and next time I don't stop." The relief was palpable but temporary. Everyone understood how fragile their safety was. Ainsley caught Principal Finch's eye across the room. He looked at her with that same pitying expression he had worn for weeks, as if even now, even in this crisis, he was thinking about her supposed psychological issues. It would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. As the afternoon shifted toward evening, the physical needs of 200 hostages became pressing. People needed bathrooms, water, medications. The armed men allowed small supervised groups to use the museum's restrooms, but only under guard and with threatening reminders of what would happen if anyone tried anything heroic. When it was Ainsley's turn with a group of girls, including Tatum, she noted every detail of the route. The guard who accompanied them was the nervous one, the weak link. He kept his distance, clearly uncomfortable escorting a group of young girls. Ainsley memorized the hallway layout, the emergency exits they passed, the locked administrative doors that might lead to other parts of the building. In the bathroom, Tatum finally spoke to her directly for the first time since the crisis began. "You're not scared," she said quietly. "Everyone else is losing it and you're just calm." "How?" Ainsley washed her hands slowly. "Being scared doesn't help," she said. "So I'm choosing not to be." "That's not normal," Tatum said. "That's not how people react." "Maybe," Ainsley replied. "Or maybe you just don't know me as well as you thought you did." They returned to the exhibition hall in silence. The sun was setting now, visible through the high windows, painting the marble floors in shades of orange and red. The museum's lighting had shifted to evening mode, creating long shadows that made the space feel even more ominous. More police had arrived outside. News helicopters competed with law enforcement aircraft for airspace. The world was watching, but inside the museum, time had become elastic and strange. Crew had saved Ainsley's spot beside him. "You okay?" he asked when she sat down. "Yes," she said. "I am okay." He studied her face. "You know what I think?" he said quietly. "I think everything you said about your mom is true. I think she really is a Navy SEAL. Because there's no way you'd be this calm, this aware, if you hadn't grown up around someone who taught you how to handle situations like this." Ainsley felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thanks," she said, "for believing me." "Always," he replied. Across the room, Principal Finch was arguing with the leader about getting food for the children. The man was refusing, saying it would complicate their logistics. Mrs. Holloway was trying to keep students calm by leading them in quiet songs. Mr. Paxton sat with his head in his hands, still shaking from his near execution. And Tatum, who had spent weeks making Ainsley's life hell, kept glancing over at her with an expression that might have been the beginning of understanding. The radio crackled again. The leader listened, and his expression shifted to something harder, more determined. He looked at his two companions and gave a sharp nod. "They're bringing in their hostage rescue team," he said, "which means we're running out of time. Get ready to move to Phase 2. Ainsley's stomach dropped. Phase 2 meant they had planned for escalation. It meant the bluff was ending and real violence might be about to begin. She looked at Crew, at the terrified students around her, at the adults who had no idea how to protect them. And she made a decision that her mother would probably have forbidden, but that felt necessary and right. She started paying even closer attention to everything, cataloging not just for survival, but for action. Because if Phase 2 meant what she feared it meant, waiting for rescue might not be enough. They might need someone who understood tactics, someone who had been trained, even inadvertently, for exactly this kind of situation. Someone who everyone thought was just a delusional child, but who might be the only person in this room who actually knew what they were doing. Phase 2 began with the armed men separating hostages into groups. Students in one area, teachers in another, other adult visitors scattered throughout. The leader explained with cold efficiency that dispersing the hostages made any rescue attempt more complicated, more dangerous, more likely to result in casualties. It was tactical thinking that Ainsley recognized immediately as sound. It was also terrifying. Ainsley found herself separated from Crew, placed with a group of younger students who needed supervision. She ended up near a cluster of sixth graders who were crying quietly, their fear a tangible presence. One girl, maybe 12 years old with dark braids, kept whispering that she wanted her mom. Ainsley sat beside her and took her hand the way she had with the panicking boy earlier. "Your mom is probably outside right now," Ainsley said softly. "She's probably watching the news and waiting to get you back. So we're going to stay calm and quiet and make sure that happens. Okay?" The girl nodded, clinging to Ainsley's hand. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ainsley. What's yours?" "Piper." "Okay, Piper. I need you to help me keep an eye on these other kids. Can you do that? Can you help me keep them calm?" Giving Piper a task, a purpose, seemed to steady her. She nodded again and turned to comfort the child next to her. Ainsley had learned that technique from her mother too, the understanding that people handled fear better when they had something constructive to focus on. The nervous gunman was assigned to watch Ainsley's section. She could see him struggling with the reality of what they were doing. He kept shifting his weight, checking his phone, avoiding eye contact with the children. When one of the younger boys asked to use the bathroom, the man looked genuinely distressed by the request. "Not right now," he said, his voice lacking conviction. "Just hold it, okay? We'll figure something out." "He's 6 years old," Ainsley said, her tone respectful but firm. "He can't hold it. If you don't let him go, he's going to have an accident, and that's going to upset him and all the other kids. 5 minutes. I'll take him. You can watch us the whole time." The man looked torn between orders and basic humanity. Finally, he gestured with his weapon. "Fine. 5 minutes. Front bathroom only. I'm watching the door. Anything weird happens, anything at all, and we have problems." Ainsley took the little boy's hand and led him down the corridor she had memorized earlier. The guard followed at a distance, his weapon lowered but ready. Inside the bathroom, Ainsley helped the child and then took an extra moment to look around. There was a window, too small for an adult, but maybe big enough for a child. There was a vent cover that looked loose. There were paper towels and soap dispensers that could be used as distractions or makeshift weapons if needed. She filed it all away and brought the boy back to the group. The guard seemed almost grateful for the lack of incident. "See?" Ainsley said to him quietly. "Cooperation works better than force, especially with kids." He looked at her strangely. "You're pretty calm for a kid," he said. "Panicking doesn't help anyone," Ainsley replied. "I'd rather be useful." The hours continued to drag. Outside, floodlights had been set up as darkness fell completely, bathing the museum exterior in harsh white light. The sound of helicopters was constant now, a thrumming reminder of the forces gathering beyond the walls. Inside, the hostages grew increasingly exhausted, fear giving way to a kind of numb endurance. Around 9 in the evening, the leader received a call that changed his demeanor entirely. His face went dark with anger. "What do you mean negotiations have broken down?" He shouted into his phone. "We had an agreement. They were supposed to provide the bus." He listened, his jaw clenching. "No, that's not acceptable. Tell them if they breach, we start with the kids. We're not bluffing anymore." Fresh terror rippled through the hostages. Parents pulled children closer. Teachers looked at each other with helpless desperation. Principal Finch tried to approach the leader, to plead for reasonableness, but was warned off with a raised weapon. Ainsley's mind raced through scenarios. If negotiations had truly failed, law enforcement would be preparing for a tactical breach. That meant hostage rescue teams, probably already positioned, waiting for the right moment. It meant flashbangs, smoke-controlled chaos designed to overwhelm the hostage-takers before they could react. It meant danger, but also opportunity. She caught Crew's eye across the room. He was watching her with an intensity that suggested he understood something was about to happen. She gave him the smallest nod, trying to communicate without words. "Be ready. Stay low. Follow my lead if things go sideways." The leader was now barking orders to his companions. "Lights off," he said. "Makes it harder for thermal imaging. Everyone stays exactly where they are. First person who moves gets shot. I don't care if it's a kid." The museum's interior lights went dark, leaving only the harsh glow from the floodlights outside creating strange shadows through the windows. In the darkness, Ainsley felt hyper-aware of every sound. The breathing of frightened children around her, the shuffle of the guards repositioning, the distant thrum of helicopters, and something else, something most people wouldn't notice, but that she had learned to recognize from countless evenings at home when her mother returned from training exercises. The almost imperceptible sound of professionals moving into position. She heard it in the quality of the silence outside, in the way the helicopter patterns shifted, in subtle changes to the building's ambient noise that suggested personnel were entering through alternate access points. They were coming. The rescue was imminent, and when it started, it would be violent and fast and terrifying. Ainsley leaned close to Piper and the other children near her. "When I tell you to get down," she whispered, "you drop flat on the floor and cover your head with your arms. Don't look up. Don't run. Just stay down until someone in a uniform tells you it's safe. Understand? The children nodded, their eyes wide in the darkness. Piper squeezed Ainsley's hand. Are they coming to save us? She whispered. Yes, Ainsley said. They're coming. Very soon. We just have to be ready. The nervous guard was pacing now, his agitation visible even in the dim light. The leader was focused on the main entrance, his weapon trained on the doors. The third man was watching the upper level, where windows and skylights provided possible breach points. They were spread thin, watching too many angles, exactly the kind of tactical vulnerability that a well-trained team would exploit. Ainsley's heart pounded, but her breathing stayed controlled. She thought about her mother, somewhere out there in the world, possibly not even knowing yet that Ainsley was in danger. She thought about all the times Sloane had left for missions, all the nights Ainsley had worried and waited. Now Ainsley was the one in the operational zone, the one who had to stay calm under fire, the one whose training was about to be tested for real. A sudden sound made everyone freeze. Not a breach, not yet, but something outside, metal on metal, equipment being moved into final position. The leader swore under his breath. They're coming, he said to his men. Weapons hot. First responder through that door takes a round. Let them know we're serious. Ainsley positioned herself between the children and the nearest guard. She made herself small, non-threatening, but her muscles were coiled and ready. Every sense was heightened. She could smell fierce sweat from the people around her, could feel the texture of the marble floor beneath her, could hear her own heartbeat counting down seconds. Then the world exploded into action. Multiple breaches simultaneously. The main doors blew inward with a concussive blast that left ears ringing. Windows shattered on the upper level. Smoke grenades filled the room with choking gray clouds. Flashbangs detonated with light and sound so overwhelming that even prepared people would be disoriented. Ainsley dropped flat and pulled Piper down with her, covering the younger girl's body with her own. Get down, she shouted to the other children. Stay down. All around her was chaos and shouting and the controlled aggression of a tactical team executing a precision assault. She kept her head low, her eyes squeezed shut against the flashbangs, her body protecting the child beneath her. Gunfire erupted, brief and controlled, shouting in clipped professional voices. Don't move. Hand where we can see them. Secure that sector. Clear, clear, clear. The language of professionals doing work they had trained for thousands of times. And then, through the smoke and chaos, Ainsley heard a voice that stopped her heart. A voice she would recognize anywhere, in any circumstance. Clear the hostages, the voice commanded. I want eyes on every single person. Account for everyone. Her mother's voice, command sharp and absolutely certain. Commander Sloane Renwick was in the building. The smoke was beginning to clear, revealing figures in tactical gear moving through the exhibition hall with practiced efficiency. They wore full combat loadout, helmets with face shields, weapons trained and ready. To the terrified hostages, they looked like something from a movie, larger than life, moving with a coordination that spoke to countless hours of training. Ainsley kept her head down, still covering Piper, but her eyes tracked the movements around her. She counted 6 operators in her immediate vicinity, each one clearing sectors and securing the perimeter with mechanical precision. The 3 armed men who had held them hostage were now face down on the floor, zip-tied and neutralized. The entire assault had taken less than 90 seconds from breach to control. All hostiles secured, a voice called out. Beginning hostage extraction. Operators began moving through the groups, checking people for injuries, helping them to their feet, directing them toward designated exit routes. Ainsley felt strong hands lift her gently. Up you come, a male voice said. You're safe now. Let's get you out of here. She stood, still holding Piper's hand, and looked toward the source of the commanding voice she had heard. Through the dissipating smoke, she could see a figure near the main breach point, taller than the others, moving with an authority that made everyone else defer. The figure removed her helmet, and even in the chaos and dim lighting, Ainsley would know that profile anywhere. Commander Sloane Renwick stood in full tactical gear, her face smudged with residue from the breaches, her expression hard and focused as she coordinated the extraction. She was speaking into her radio, directing teams, accounting for casualties, ensuring every hostage was identified and evacuated safely. She looked nothing like the suburban mother who drove a sensible sedan and wore yoga pants to the grocery store. She looked exactly like what she was, a highly trained special operations warrior in her element. Sector 3 clear, an operator reported. No civilian casualties. All hostages accounted for. Sloan nodded. Good. Get them to the staging area. Medical teams are waiting. She turned, scanning the room with tactical precision, and her eyes landed on Ainsley. For a fraction of a second, her professional mask cracked. The relief and fear and love that flashed across her face was visible only to someone who knew her well. Then the mask was back, and she was Commander Renwick again, not Mom. Ainsley felt the operator guiding her toward the exit, but she couldn't stop staring at her mother. Piper, still clinging to her hand, looked between them with confusion. Do you know her? The younger girl asked. That's my mom, Ainsley said quietly. The operator who was escorting them must have heard because he glanced back at Sloan with new understanding. You're Commander Renwick's kid? He asked. Ainsley nodded. He gave a low whistle. Well, that explains a lot. Your mom is a legend. They were being moved toward the main exit now, joining streams of other hostages being evacuated. Ainsley could see crew ahead of her with another group. Mrs. Holloway crying with relief, Principal Finch looking shell-shocked. Mr. Paxton was being helped by medics, still recovering from his earlier ordeal. Tatum was with her group, looking dazed and frightened. As they passed near Sloan's position, the commander stepped into their path. She looked down at Ainsley, her professional composure firmly in place despite the emotion Ainsley could see in her eyes. Are you hurt? Sloan asked, her voice clipped and professional. No, ma'am, Ainsley said, matching her mother's formal tone. I'm okay. I kept the younger kids calm like you taught me. Something flickered across Sloan's face, pride mixed with concern. Good work. Now get to the medical staging area. They need to check everyone. Yes, ma'am, Ainsley said. She started to move past, then paused. Mom? She said quietly, letting the words slip out despite the formal setting. Sloan's jaw tightened. I know, sweetheart. I know. We'll talk soon. Right now, I need to finish securing this site. Go. Ainsley nodded and continued toward the exit, but she could feel her mother's eyes following her every step. Behind them, she heard Sloan giving orders, her voice steady and commanding. I want a full sweep of every room. Check for secondary devices. Get forensics in here. Someone find out who these people are and who they're working with. Move. Outside, the museum grounds have been transformed into an operational zone. Emergency vehicles line the street, their lights painting everything in alternating blue and red. News crews were being held back behind barricades. Medical teams had set up triage stations where hostages were being checked for injuries and shock. Parents who had been waiting for hours rushed forward as their children emerged, creating scenes of tearful reunion. Ainsley and Piper were directed to a medical tent where paramedics checked them over. You're remarkably calm for what you just went through, one of the medics said to Ainsley. Most kids your age are in shock right now. My mom taught me how to handle stress, Ainsley said simply. The medic glanced at the information sheet attached to his clipboard. Your mother is listed as Sloan Renwick, government contractor. That right? That's the cover story, Ainsley said. She's actually the SEAL commander who just led the rescue operation. The medic's eyebrows rose. He looked toward the museum entrance where tactical team members were still moving in and out. Commander Renwick? He said. Your daughter? Yes. Kid, the medic said with genuine respect. That's one hell of a mom you've got there. I know, Ainsley said. Crew found her 20 minutes later, after he had been cleared by his own medical check. He pushed through the crowd of hostages and rescuers until he reached her. When he did, he just stared for a moment. I heard people talking, he said. They're saying Commander Renwick led the team. They're saying she's one of the most decorated SEALs in the special operations community. They're saying she's your mom. She is, Ainsley said. You were telling the truth the whole time, Crew said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Everyone thought you were lying, and you were telling the truth the entire time." "Yeah," Ainsley said, "but the truth was classified. That's why she couldn't prove it. That's why I couldn't prove it." Crew sat down beside her on the curb where she was waiting. "Some truths are bigger than middle school," he said quietly. "Some truths protect people." Ainsley looked at him with gratitude. "You believed me when no one else did." "Because I know you," he replied. "And because even when everyone was panicking in there, you knew what to do. That doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from having someone teach you." They sat together in silence, watching the organized chaos around them. Ainsley saw Principal Finch talking to police, looking shaken. She saw Mrs. Holloway reuniting with her own family. She saw Barrett and several other students being interviewed by authorities. And she saw Tatum, sitting alone near an ambulance, staring at nothing. Ainsley stood and walked over to her former tormentor. Tatum looked up as she approached, her face streaked with tears and grime. "I'm sorry," Tatum said immediately. "For everything. All of it. You were telling the truth, and I made your life hell. I'm so sorry." Ainsley studied her for a moment. "You didn't believe me because I couldn't prove it. That's not entirely your fault. My mom's job requires secrecy. But the bullying, the mockery, the way you turned everyone against me, that was your choice." "I know," Tatum whispered. "I don't know how to make it right." "You can start by telling the truth now," Ainsley said. "When everyone asks what happened, when the story comes out, you tell them that I wasn't lying, that my mother really is who I said she was. Can you do that?" Tatum nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I promise. I'll tell everyone." Ainsley turned to walk back to Crew, but paused. "And Tatum? Next time someone tells you something that sounds impossible, maybe consider that some people's lives are just bigger than what fits in your understanding of the world." She returned to Crew's side as news helicopters circled overhead and reporters shouted questions from beyond the barricades. Somewhere inside the museum, her mother was still working, still commanding, still being the professional warrior that duty required. But soon, very soon, Sloane would be done with the operational necessities. Soon she would come find her daughter. And when she did, Ainsley knew there would be no more pretending, no more cover stories, no more hiding the truth from people who had spent weeks calling that truth a lie. The revelation was coming, inevitable and undeniable. Everyone would know. The school would know. The teachers would know. The students who had mocked her would know. And they would have to face what they had done to a child who had only ever told them the truth. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour of the rescue, news vans from every major network had arrived. Reporters pushed against police barricades, cameras rolling, trying to capture every angle of the story. Hostage crisis at National Museum. Children held at gunpoint. Dramatic SEAL team rescue. It was the kind of story that would dominate headlines for days. What made it more explosive was the identity of the rescue team commander. Information leaked quickly in the age of social media and instant communication. Someone had recognized Commander Sloane Renwick. Someone else had connected her to one of the hostages. Within 2 hours, the story had shifted from generic rescue operation to something far more personal and compelling. Navy SEAL commander saves her own daughter in museum hostage crisis. One headline would read, "Elite operator leads team that rescued 200, including her child." The human interest angle was irresistible, and every news organization scrambled to be first with the details. Ainsley watched it unfold from the family reunification area where hostages were being held until they could be formally released to their parents or guardians. Someone had set up a television showing the news coverage, and she could see her mother's name appearing on cheer-ins, file footage of SEAL training exercises, graphics explaining Special Operations Command structure. A reporter on screen was interviewing what they described as a military analyst. Commander Renwick is one of the most highly decorated members of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the analyst explained. She's been involved in classified operations around the world. The fact that she was available and deployed for this domestic crisis suggests she may have been in the area for other reasons. The reporter nodded seriously. "And we're hearing that her daughter was among the hostages, one of the middle school students on a field trip. Can you imagine the emotional complexity of leading a rescue operation when your own child's life is at stake? The training these operators undergo is designed to help them compartmentalize, the analyst said. But yes, this would be extraordinarily challenging even for someone of Commander Renwick's caliber. Crew, sitting beside Ainsley, shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. Everyone's going to know now. They already know, Ainsley said quietly. Look, she pointed to a cluster of students from their school who were huddled around someone's phone, clearly reading social media posts. Their expressions ranged from shock to embarrassment to disbelief. Word was spreading through the hostages in real time. Ainsley Renwick hadn't been lying. Her mother really was a Navy SEAL. Not just any SEAL, but a commander, highly decorated, leading rescue operations. Principal Finch approached Ainsley slowly, his face a mixture of shame and uncertainty. Ainsley, he said, his voice hoarse from the evening's stress. I owe you an apology. A profound apology. We didn't believe you. We assumed. And he trailed off, unable to finish. You thought I was a troubled child seeking attention. Ainsley said, her tone neutral. You called my mother's cover number, and when it didn't confirm her real job, you decided I was making everything up. Principal Finch winced. Yes, and I was wrong. Deeply wrong. The way we handled this, the way we dismissed you and even blamed you, it was a failure on our part. On my part. Mrs. Holloway had joined them, her eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry, Ainsley, she said. I should have protected you from the bullying. Instead, I enabled it. I made it worse by not believing you. There's no excuse for that. Ainsley looked at both of them for a long moment. My mom's job requires operational security, she said. She couldn't prove who she was without risking her missions and the people she works with. That meant I couldn't prove it either. But you're adults. You're supposed to protect students from bullying regardless of whether you believe their stories. You're supposed to make schools safe. And you didn't do that. The shame on their faces deepened. Principal Finch nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. We failed in our fundamental responsibility. I don't know how to make that right, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my career trying to do better. Mrs. Holloway was crying openly now. I'm so sorry, she repeated. You're an incredibly brave young woman, and I should have seen that. Before Ainsley could respond, there was a commotion near the entrance to the reunification area. Sloane had arrived. Still in her tactical gear, though, she had removed her helmet and weapon. Her presence was commanding, drawing attention from everyone in the space. She moved through the crowd with purpose, her eyes scanning until they found Ainsley. The reunion was both public and intensely private. Sloane crossed the distance in quick strides and pulled Ainsley into a fierce embrace. The professional mask was gone now, replaced by pure maternal relief and fear and love. Are you okay? Sloane asked, her voice rough. Did they hurt you? Are you really okay? I'm fine, Mom, Ainsley said into her mother's shoulder. I did what you taught me. I stayed calm. I helped the younger kids. I survived. Sloane pulled back to look at her daughter's face, checking for injuries, for signs of trauma. I was 3 states away when I got the call, she said. We flew in on a transport helicopter. Fastest mission brief I've ever done. The whole flight here, all I could think about was getting you out safely. You did, Ainsley said. You saved all of us. Around them, people were watching this moment. Fellow hostages, police officers, medical personnel, reporters who had managed to get closer than they should have. Phones were out recording. This would be on the news, on social media, everywhere. The secret was completely blown now. There was no going back to cover stories and vague government contractor explanations. A man in a suit approached, showing credentials that identified him as FBI. Commander Renwick, he said respectfully, we need to debrief you and your team, and we'll need to interview your daughter as well. Several witnesses have indicated she showed remarkable composure and may have useful observations about the hostage-takers. Sloane's expression hardened slightly. My daughter has been through a traumatic experience. The interview can wait until tomorrow at the earliest. Of course, the agent said. We just wanted you to know it will be necessary at some point. He looked at Ainsley with respect. From what we're hearing, you helped keep a lot of younger children calm in there. That probably saved lives. Panic in a hostage situation can be deadly. My mom taught me well, Ainsley said simply. Clearly, the agent replied. Over the next hour, the reunification process continued. Parents arrived to collect their children, creating scenes of emotional reunion throughout the area. Ainsley watched as Tatum was embraced by her mother, both of them crying. She watched as Crew's parents arrived and held him like they would never let go. She watched as teachers and students who had spent weeks making her life miserable now had to confront the reality of what they had done. Barrett approached her hesitantly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. I was wrong, he said simply. I was cruel and wrong, and I'm sorry. Ainsley nodded. You were, and sorry doesn't erase what you did. But it's a start. He looked at Sloane, still in her tactical gear, and seemed to shrink slightly. Your mom is terrifying, he said. My mom is a professional who does a dangerous job protecting people, Ainsley corrected. There's a difference between terrifying and competent. Yeah, he said. I see that now. A news crew had somehow gotten past security and was approaching. A reporter with perfect hair and a microphone was making a beeline for Sloane and Ainsley. Commander Renwick, she called out. Can you comment on what it was like to rescue your own daughter? How did you maintain professional distance during such a personal crisis? Sloane turned to face the camera, and her expression went cold and professional. No comment, she said flatly. This is still an active investigation. Any statements will come through official Navy channels. But surely, the reporter pressed, you must have some thoughts about the emotional. No comment, Sloane repeated more firmly. And you need to leave this reunification area. Now. Security moved in to escort the reporter out, but the damage was done. The footage would air. The questions would multiply. Privacy, already compromised, would become non-existent. Sloane looked down at Ainsley with exhaustion and concern. This is going to be complicated, she said quietly. The media attention. The questions. Your life is about to change significantly. It already changed, Ainsley said. Everyone knows the truth now. Finally, Sloane cupped her daughter's face gently. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what you went through at school. I'm sorry the secrecy meant you had to face that alone. I wasn't alone, Ainsley said, glancing at Crew across the room. And I learned something important. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. You taught me that without even meaning to. Everything I needed to survive today, you gave me. Sloane's eyes shimmered with tears she was too disciplined to let fall. You're remarkable, you know that? Braver than most adults I know. I had a good teacher, Ainsley replied. Around them, the long night was slowly winding down. The hostages would all go home eventually, changed by what they had experienced. The school would have to grapple with how they had failed one of their students. The media would dissect every angle of the story. And Ainsley Renwick, who had spent weeks being called a liar for telling the truth, would finally, definitively, be vindicated in the most dramatic way imaginable. The days following the museum rescue were a whirlwind of media attention, official statements, and slow-burning recognition of just how badly the school had failed Ainsley Renwick. News coverage was relentless. Every network featured segments about Commander Sloane Renwick, one of the few female Navy SEALs who had led the hostage rescue operation that saved 200 people, including her own daughter. The human interest angle was irresistible. Interviews with hostages revealed how calm and capable Ainsley had been during the crisis, how she had helped younger children manage their fear, how she had demonstrated tactical awareness beyond her years. One of the SEAL operators who had participated in the rescue gave an anonymous interview describing how Ainsley had positioned herself and the children in her care for optimal safety, how she had recognized the signs of an impending breach before most adults in the room. She's clearly been raised by a professional, the operator said, his face obscured and voice distorted. That kind of situational awareness doesn't happen by accident. Commander Renwick's daughter showed incredible composure under conditions that would break most adults. The story took another turn when reporters began digging into Ainsley's school experience. Someone leaked information about the bullying campaign, the social media mockery, the school administration's response. A parent who had witnessed Tatum's park challenge posted video footage online. Former classmates came forward with stories about how Ainsley had been treated for simply telling the truth about her mother. The narrative shifted from heartwarming rescue story to damning indictment of how institutions fail children. Local news ran a segment titled, "When the Truth Gets You Bullied." One student's fight to be believed. National outlets picked it up. Education experts were brought on to discuss the responsibilities of schools to protect students from harassment regardless of the circumstances. Principal Finch found himself giving uncomfortable press conferences, admitting failures in how the situation had been handled. "We did not adequately protect Ainsley Renwick from sustained bullying," he said, reading from a prepared statement. "We dismissed her claims without proper investigation, and we failed to recognize that some truths cannot be easily verified but are truths nonetheless. We are implementing new policies to ensure this never happens again." Mrs. Holloway gave no public statements, but she submitted her resignation effective at the end of the semester. The guilt of her role in Ainsley's torment was apparently too much to bear while continuing to face her former student. Sloan kept Ainsley home from school for a week while the media firestorm raged. They spent time together in a way they rarely could when Sloan was deployed or training. They talked about the hostage crisis, about Ainsley's emotions, about how to process trauma. They also talked about the weeks of bullying, about how isolated Ainsley had felt, about the cost of operational security on a child's life. "I know I ask a lot of you," Sloan said one evening as they sat together on the couch. "My career requires secrecy, and that secrecy hurt you. If I could change that, I would." "I don't want you to change it," Ainsley said. "What you do matters. You save people. That's more important than middle school drama." "You matter too," Sloan said firmly. "You're not less important than my missions." "Never think that." "I know," Ainsley replied. "And honestly, Mom, I think I learned something important from all of this. I learned that I can handle hard things. I learned that the truth doesn't need everyone's belief to be real. And I learned that sometimes protecting something bigger than yourself means accepting temporary pain." Sloan pulled her daughter close. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Ainsley said, echoing her earlier words. When Ainsley finally returned to school, everything had changed. The principal had called a mandatory assembly where he formally apologized to Ainsley in front of the entire student body. He acknowledged the school's failures, announced new anti-bullying initiatives, and made it clear that harassment of any student for any reason would result in serious consequences. Tatum stood at the assembly and asked permission to speak. When granted, she walked to the microphone with visible nervousness. Her voice shook as she addressed the auditorium. "I was the person who started the bullying campaign against Ainsley Renwick," she said. "I made her life miserable because I didn't believe her. I created social media accounts to mock her. I organized that challenge at the park to humiliate her. I was cruel and I was wrong, and I want everyone here to know that Ainsley never lied. Not once. She told the truth, and I punished her for it. I'm sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I'm saying it anyway because she deserves to hear it publicly the way I attacked her publicly." The auditorium was silent. Students who had participated in the mockery looked uncomfortable. Teachers who had dismissed Ainsley's claims looked ashamed. Ainsley sat in her seat next to Crew, watching as the girl who had tormented her took public responsibility for her actions. After the assembly, things were different. Students who had ignored Ainsley or actively bullied her now went out of their way to be kind. Some apologized directly. Others simply treated her with a respect that had been absent before. Barrett approached her in the cafeteria on her second day back. "I know I already said I was sorry," he said, "but I wanted you to know that I told my parents what I did. They made me volunteer at a veteran support organization as consequence. I've been helping there for the past week. Hearing the stories from actual service members, learning what they sacrifice, it made me realize how terrible I was to you." "That's good," Ainsley said. "I hope you keep volunteering even after your punishment is over." "I plan to," he said. "It's actually pretty meaningful work." The teachers were equally changed. Mr. Paxton, who had been one of the hostages, sought Ainsley out during lunch. He sat down across from her with permission. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "I know you helped keep kids calm during the crisis. One of the sixth graders told me you held her hand and taught her breathing exercises. That kind of leadership under pressure is extraordinary. I just did what needed to be done, Ainsley said. Most people don't do what needs to be done when they're terrified, Mr. Paxton replied. They freeze. They panic. You acted. That says something important about your character. The most significant change came in how people viewed her connection to her mother. Before, Sloane's career had been something Ainsley couldn't discuss, couldn't prove, couldn't share. Now, students asked respectful questions about what it was like to have a parent in special operations. Teachers adjusted expectations when Ainsley needed to miss school for official events related to the hostage crisis aftermath. Crew remained her closest friend, but others began to include her in their groups. She was invited to study sessions, to weekend activities, to the kinds of normal middle school social interactions that had been denied to her during the weeks of bullying. The isolation ended, replaced by a tentative but genuine acceptance. 3 weeks after the museum crisis, Sloane was given permission to visit the school in uniform for a career day event. The auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, and even some parents came to hear her speak. She stood at the podium in her dress uniform, medals visible, her bearing professional and commanding. She spoke about service, about sacrifice, about the importance of protecting others. She spoke about teamwork and training and the mental discipline required for special operations work. But what resonated most was when she spoke about her daughter. Being a SEAL requires making hard choices, Sloane said. One of the hardest has been maintaining operational security at the cost of my daughter's ability to talk about what I do. For weeks, Ainsley endured mockery and isolation because she told the truth about my career but couldn't prove it. She was bullied, dismissed, and failed by adults who should have protected her. And through it all, she never broke. She never revealed classified information, even when doing so would have ended her suffering. That kind of integrity, that kind of strength, is what makes someone truly exceptional. The auditorium was silent, except for the sound of few people crying. Ainsley sat in the front row, her face burning with emotion. Her mother's public acknowledgement of what she had endured, the validation after so much doubt, was overwhelming. My daughter is brave, Sloane continued, braver than she knows. She handled the hostage crisis with more composure than most trained adults. She protected younger children. She stayed calm. And she did all of that because she learned something important, that strength isn't about proving yourself to people who don't believe you. It's about knowing who you are regardless of what others think. The assembly ended with a standing ovation. Afterward, students and teachers lined up to thank Sloane for her service and to meet her. Ainsley watched with pride and relief as her mother, no longer hidden behind cover stories and classified restrictions, could finally be seen for who she truly was. 2 months after the museum crisis, life had settled into a new normal. Ainsley walked through the school hallways without fear, without the weight of isolation pressing down on her shoulders. The stares she received now were respectful rather than mocking. Students who passed her in the corridors offered genuine smiles instead of whispered insults. The cafeteria at lunch had become a different place entirely. Ainsley sat with crew as always, but their table had expanded to include others. Piper, the younger girl from the museum whom Ainsley had comforted, often joined them with her 6th-grade friends. Even some of Tatum's former group occasionally sat nearby, tentatively rebuilding social connections that had been destroyed by their earlier cruelty. Tatum herself had changed visibly. The arrogant confidence that had defined her had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more humble. She kept her distance from Ainsley most of the time, respecting the boundaries that trauma and betrayal had created. But when they did interact, in class or in passing, there was a mutual understanding between them. Tatum would carry the weight of what she had done, and Ainsley would carry the strength of having survived it. One afternoon, Tatum approached Ainsley's table during lunch. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked quietly. Ainsley nodded and followed her to a quieter corner of the cafeteria. "I wanted you to know," Tatum said, "that I've been seeing a counselor, talking about why I did what I did, why I needed to tear you down like that." "And what did you figure out?" Ainsley asked. "That I was threatened by you," Tatum admitted. You were different. You didn't care about the social hierarchy or fitting in. You had something real, something important in your life, and I couldn't stand that. So I tried to destroy it. I tried to make you as small as I felt inside. Ainsley considered this for a moment. I appreciate you telling me that, she said, and I appreciate that you're working on yourself. But you should know that what you did, it changed me. I'm not the same person I was before all this started. I know, Tatum said, and I'm sorry that I'm part of why you had to change. She paused, then added, for what it's worth, I think you're the strongest person I know. What you did in that museum, how you handled everything, it's something I could never do. You might surprise yourself, Ainsley said. People are usually stronger than they think. They just don't know it until they have to be. Tatum nodded and walked away, leaving Ainsley to return her table. Crew raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, Ainsley said. Just closure, I think. Or with the beginning of it anyway. The school had implemented significant changes in the wake of the scandal. New anti-bullying protocols had been established. Teachers received training on recognizing and addressing harassment. A student advisory board had been created to give kids a voice in school policies. Principal Finch had thrown himself into reform with the dedication of someone trying to atone for serious mistakes. Ainsley had been asked to serve on the advisory board. At first, she had been reluctant, unsure if she wanted to be defined by what had happened to her. But Sloan had encouraged her to consider it. You have perspective that other students don't have, her mother had said. You understand what it's like to be dismissed and disbelieved. You could help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. So Ainsley had accepted, and now she spent one afternoon a week meeting with other students and administrators, discussing ways to make the school safer and more inclusive. It was meaningful work, and it helped transform her trauma into something productive. At home, things had changed too. Sloane's cover had been completely blown by the museum rescue, which meant her career had to shift. She was being transitioned out of active operations and into a training role, teaching the next generation of special operators. It meant more time at home, fewer deployments, a more stable presence in Ainsley's life. The night before, they had sat together on the back porch, watching stars appear as darkness fell. Do you regret it? Ainsley had asked, having to leave active duty because of what happened. Sloan had been quiet for a long moment. No, she had finally said. I served for 15 years. I completed missions that mattered. I led teams, saved lives, did work I'm proud of. But the most important mission I have is being your mom. If this means I get to do that job better, then it's not a loss. It's a different kind of victory. What will you teach? Ainsley had asked. Resilience, Sloan had replied. Mental toughness. How to stay calm when everything is falling apart. The same things I accidentally taught you. You didn't accidentally teach me anything, Ainsley had said. You taught me exactly what I needed to know, exactly when I needed to know it. Now, sitting in the cafeteria with crew and their expanding group of friends, Ainsley felt the weight of those months beginning to lift. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it didn't define her. She had learned that she was capable of extraordinary composure under pressure. She had learned that truth doesn't require universal belief to remain true. She had learned that strength comes not from never being afraid, but from acting despite fear. The afternoon brought an unexpected assembly. Principal Finch had gathered the 7th and 8th grades without explaining why. Students filed into the auditorium with curiosity and mild concern, wondering if this was another reform announcement or perhaps news about the legal proceedings against the museum hostage-takers. Instead, when everyone was seated, Principal Finch introduced a surprise guest. Several members of the SEAL team that had conducted the museum rescue had been given permission to visit the school. They entered in dress uniforms, medals gleaming, their bearing commanding immediate respect and attention. Lieutenant Commander Hayes Brennan, who Ainsley recognized from the rescue operation, stepped to the microphone. We're here today, he said, to honor someone who demonstrated exceptional courage under circumstances that would challenge even trained professionals. During the museum hostage crisis, while adults panicked and children cried, one student kept her head. She helped younger children manage their fear. She recognized tactical details that later proved crucial to our operation. She embodied the kind of composure and selflessness that we train for in special operations. He gestured to someone waiting in the wings. Ainsley Renwick, would you please come up here? Ainsley's heart jumped. She looked at Crew, who was grinning and pushing her to stand. She walked to the stage on shaking legs, aware of 200 pairs of eyes watching her. When she reached Lieutenant Commander Brennan, he smiled warmly. On behalf of the Naval Special Warfare Command, he said, and with the approval of your mother, Commander Sloan Renwick, we want to present you with a letter of commendation for your actions during the museum crisis. Your courage helped save lives. Your leadership inspired others. Your training, passed down from one of our finest operators, was put to use in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. He handed her a framed certificate. The auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood, cheering. Teachers clapped with genuine emotion. Ainsley stood on the stage, holding the commendation, feeling tears she had held back for months finally beginning to fall. She looked out at the crowd and saw so many faces that had changed over the past months. Tatum, clapping with tears on her cheeks. Barrett, on his feet and cheering. Mrs. Chun, the hallway supervisor who had ignored the bullying, wiping her eyes. Principal Finch, looking proud and ashamed simultaneously. And Crew, her constant friend, giving her a thumbs up with a huge smile. In the back of the auditorium, Ainsley spotted her mother. Sloan had slipped in quietly, still in her training uniform, and she was watching her daughter with an expression of fierce pride and love. Their eyes met across the distance, and no words were needed. When the applause finally died down, Lieutenant Commander Brennan offered Ainsley the microphone. She hadn't prepared anything to say. She looked out at the auditorium and spoke from her heart. For a long time, she began, I felt like I had to prove something to everyone here. I had to prove my mother was who I said she was. I had to prove I wasn't lying. I had to prove I deserved respect. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But what I learned is that the people who matter will believe you without proof. My friend Crew believed me when no one else did. My mom taught me to be strong even when strength meant staying silent. And when it really mattered, when lives were at stake, everything I'd learned came together. She held up the commendation. This is an honor I'll treasure. But the real honor was learning that I'm capable of more than I knew, that I can protect others, that I can stay calm when everything is chaos, that I can tell the truth even when no one believes me, and still remain true to who I am. She looked directly at the section where Tatum and her former tormentors sat. To everyone who doubted me, who mocked me, who made me feel small, thank you. You taught me that external validation isn't what makes something true. You taught me to find strength inside myself, rather than seeking it from others. You made me stronger by trying to break me. The auditorium was completely silent now. And to everyone who's going through something similar, she continued, to anyone who's being bullied or dismissed or told their truth isn't real, I want you to know this. Hold on to what you know is true. Protect it. Let it make you stronger. The people who can't see your truth today will see it eventually. And when they do, make sure you're still standing tall. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar courage in someone you know. Tell us about a time when someone surprised you by revealing hidden strength, or when you had to stay true to yourself despite overwhelming pressure to conform. The assembly ended with another standing ovation. Ainsley walked off the stage and straight into her mother's embrace. Sloan held her tight, and Ainsley could feel her mother's pride radiating through the hug. I'm so proud of you, Sloan whispered, not just for what you did in the museum, for how you've handled all of this with grace and strength. I learned from the best, Ainsley whispered back. They left the auditorium together, mother and daughter, no longer hiding, no longer pretending. The truth was out, undeniable and complete. And Ainsley Renwick, who had spent weeks being called a liar for simply telling the truth, had been vindicated in every way that mattered. She had survived the mockery. She had endured the isolation. She had protected others when crisis came. And she had emerged stronger, wiser, and absolutely certain of who she was and what she was capable of becoming. The girl who claimed her mom was a SEAL had been telling the truth all along. And now, finally, everyone knew it.